Good day to our listeners. Welcome to our informal high school debate on the topic about forgiveness. Today's discussion will include opening statements, arguments, rebuttals, and closing remarks. There will be no official winner decided by us. Instead, we invite you, our audience, to listen, reflect, and decide for yourselves on which side will you guys represent.
I'm Abigail D, and I will be representing the affirmative side in today's opening. Forgiveness is often seen as difficult, emotional, and even unfair, yet it remains one of the most powerful choices an individual can make for themselves. Today, our side stands by the resolution that everyone should be forgiven. Our position is not about excusing wrongdoing or denying harm, but about recognizing that holding onto resentment often harms the victim far more than the perpetrator. Throughout this debate, we will argue that forgiveness benefits personal well-being, promotes understanding and unity, and reflects moral and ethical values that encourage compassion over hatred.
I am Aaron Yudo, and I will be representing the opposition in today's opening. While forgiveness can be meaningful and healing, we reject the idea that everyone should be forgiven. Forgiveness is not an obligation, nor it is entitled to anyone. When forgiveness becomes expected to anyone, it loses its moral value, undetermines accountability, and risks silencing victims whose pain cannot be simply set aside. Justice, responsibility, and respect for not a demand. In this debate, we will show that unconditional forgiveness can lead to injustice, discourage accountability, and ignore the real limits of human capacity to heal.
Those who don't forgive are stuck in the past that no longer affects the perpetrator but only themselves. I am Lizelle, and I will be on the affirmative side, which supports the notion that everyone should forgive. As to what Abby had said, we have prepared 3 arguments to this debate. First is that forgiveness is for our own peace and physical health. Therefore, we should always forgive for the benefit of ourselves. Louis B. Swedish said that to forgive is to set a prisoner free, and to realize that that prisoner was us. If someone doesn't feel remorse for their actions, then your forgiveness is irrelevant to them. Likewise, if someone felt truly sorry for what they've done, they will feel guilt and sorry, regardless of your forgiveness. Therefore, focusing our energy and actions on the mistakes of others will only hinder our growth. Furthermore, many studies over the years have shown that people who do not forgive experience more stress, anger, and a lack of emotional regulation, which hinder us for finding inner peace. Secondly, we will never truly understand the severity and intention of a mistake or action unless we communicate and open our minds to forgiveness. A major cause of broken relationships are miscommunications. If both parties were to be more open and forgiving and understanding, then the issue could have been resolved. Additionally, broken relationships can cause societal disharmony. For example, if 2 friends in a friend group fight, they are more likely needed to pick a side in the end. Lastly, the Lord forgave even when he was relentlessly tortured and crucified. In Luke chapter 23, verse 24, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." The teachings in the Bible also implore us to forgive and to move past the natural tendency for people to sin and make mistakes. For example, it is stated in Colossians chapter 3, verse 14, that we should bear with each other and forgive one another if any of us has a grievance against someone, and that we should forgive as the Lord forgave us.
Absolute forgiveness will lead to the loss of significance of forgiveness as a whole. My name is Gabriel Chua, and I will be representing the opposition side for today's debate. We firmly support the resolution that not everyone should be forgiven, and have prepared 3 different arguments in accordance with the stance. Firstly, if forgiveness is unconditional, then forgiveness will become meaningless. Forgiveness is given when the perpetrator has recognized their wrongdoings and has truly changed for the better. However, if everyone is obligated to forgive, then there is no need for change and resolution, so forgiveness will then become meaningless. We could relate this to an analogy where if the world has infinite amounts of money and resources, then regardless of your job or occupation and hard work, it would all be meaningless. Secondly, if forgiveness is guaranteed with no boundary, then this forgiveness will be abused. The definition of forgiving in the Merriam-Webster dictionary is to give up resentment or to claim compensation. This means that if forgiveness is absolute, then we give up the need for consequences. And according to the National Institute of Justice, when consequences are delayed, uncertain, or absent, then people are much less deterred from repeating bad acts. This could lead to societal chaos and even larger problems in the future. Lastly, no one is entitled to forgiveness. If we force forgiveness upon everyone, then it is not true forgiveness, but rather meaningless words. Forgiveness is not a right given by solely existing, but it is a choice and a right given by the victim. In that same vein, just because we believe that our actions are minor, just doesn't mean that it is seen as minor by the victims. Nowadays, it is normalized for people to call us sensitive or even scrutinize them for not forgiving us. However, if the perpetrator is not and will never be entitled to forgiveness, because entitlement means that we are taking the rights and votes and voices away of the victims. And overall, absolute forgiveness will lead to injustice. This concludes for the argument part of this debate.
I am Akia Lua, and I will now begin to refute claims and arguments made by the opposition. First of all, the opposition claims that unconditional forgiveness makes the act meaningless because the perpetrator hasn't reflected. However, you are focusing too much on the perpetrator. Forgiveness is actually about the victim learning to move on. Scientifically, forgiving is better for your own mental health, and it's not meaningless if it's an act of self-preservation.
I am Kenji C, and I am representing the opposition. I hear your point on self-preservation, but we must look at the societal costs. If forgiveness is absolute, it leads to total chaos in our society. Forgiveness effectively absolves someone of all of their past sins. If a bank forgave every thief, why would people stop stealing? By removing consequences, we essentially validate their wrongdoing.
You argue that consequences prevent wrongdoing, but recent psychology shows that many people do not adapt their behavior even after punishment. If the consequence doesn't change the person, then holding on to resentment doesn't serve a purpose. We argue that forgiveness, when chosen freely, allows the victim to reclaim control over their future rather than be defined by the harm.
But consequences aren't just for rehabilitation. They are a moral marker to show that we did wrong. Furthermore, your side confuses advice with obligation. In cases of permanent trauma like childhood abuse, letting go might be impossible for them, psychologically and neurologically. We cannot have a moral obligation to do what is impossible.
We aren't saying that not forgiving is unethical, but rather that it is a necessary obligation to oneself to attain inner peace. Regarding trauma, a 2015 study by Bay and others found that traffic accident survivors who practiced forgiveness showed a significantly amount of reduced PTSD symptoms. Forgiveness is a tool to reduce the negative effects of that trauma, not a way to ignore it.
A study showing a benefit still doesn't make it a universal requirement though. You also mentioned religious teachings, but in a diverse society like the Philippines, religious examples cannot logically impose moral duties on everyone. Furthermore, your claim that forgiveness leads to understanding is dangerous in cases of abuse, forcing a victim to seek understanding when an intentional abuser can worsen the harm rather than absolve it.
To clarify, we never claimed forgiveness guarantees a healthy relationship or a return to the status quo. We believe it leads to mutual respect and community unity. While extreme cases like murder are difficult, our stance is applicable to the majority of real-life scenarios. Choosing forgiveness is about refusing to let the offender hold lasting power over your life. This concludes the rebuttal part of the debate.
This debate, we have shown that forgiveness is beneficial because it is for our own good and peace and physical health, because it could open the doors for reconciliation and understanding. It also allows us to follow in the path of the Lord. The main point of disagreement is the priority. We prioritize the effect of the forgiveness in the perspective of the victim, while opposition prioritizes the perspective of the perpetrator and society. The opposition claims that trauma cannot simply be reduced by forgiveness, and that forgiveness does not guarantee resolution. But we prove that there are studies that show the effects of PTSD are reduced through forgiveness, and that we never claim to guarantee resolution. Although the opposition made important points on possible lack of justice, it is necessary that we view this in the eyes of the forgiver and see that it is more beneficial for them to forgive. This concludes the affirmative side's statement.
We, the opposition, have shown that forgiving everyone can be harmful because of the loss of moral sense of responsibility, the abuse of absolute forgiveness, and the loss of right and opinion of the victim. And the act of forgiveness. As the affirmative side said, we clash on opinion, especially in the priorities. Even if you believe in the affirmative side that forgiving someone can be beneficial to the victim, it is undeniable that the lack of justice and accountability will affect many lives. The affirmative also failed to establish a rebuttal about the societal disharmony forgiveness can cause. This concludes the statements of the opposition.
That's it for our debate. Thank you for listening.
Good job, guys.
Holy! That's so bad! Oh my god, I studied so bad.
Wala na. There's like 4 minutes left before we need to get out.
I'll
Tapos
go
na yan.
prepare yan.
Can you
Send it
send
to
it?
me lang, I'll edit it.
What if it's
I'm
not
not the
8
one
minutes?
sending. I'm not the one sending.
Send-
Wait, what if it's
send
like,
it to me.
I feel like it's
Tapos
longer than
na
8
dyan.
minutes.
Nakasulat dyan.
14 minutes.